Hi, and welcome back to our channel, Pay Down Debt Solutions. Oh boy, do I have one for you guys today. Let's talk about bad advice. Now, many of us in our lifetime, right, have been given some bad advice. And hopefully we were smart enough or had learned enough to not take it. And in this case, this student scenario that we have today, a couple that were given some bad advice and chose to do something different based on tripping across our channel. So I'm really thrilled that they were able to do that. But let's talk a little bit about bad advice and what bad advice can lead you to and what path it can lead you down. So let's talk a little bit about bankruptcy again, because this couple here that came to us was going to file for bankruptcy and never needed to. Okay. And thankfully, at the end of the day, they did not. But I want to show you the scenario that they were in and why they felt like they, might need to do that. So I know bankruptcy all too well, right? Now, Dan and I didn't file for bankruptcy, but we had considered it. And we actually did talk to a bankruptcy attorney. And so some of these attorneys out there, will take your money, even though it's not really the greatest thing for you, right? But that is what their business is. You guys, they're in bankruptcy law. And bankruptcy law is really tricky. And I'll tell you that a few years ago, and actually more like 20 years ago, bankruptcy laws were very different than they are today. And so I remember, and I bet a lot of you remember, back in like 2008 or so, when the whole mortgage crisis hit, and there were lots of people that were filing for bankruptcy and they were ditching their houses, right? And they were turning around and they were getting bigger and better houses. And they were doing that by walking away from their debts. And at the time, I thought that was, that was a terrible thing to do. And I still kind of think it's a terrible thing to do, to be honest with you, right? Because I think that we should pay for what we bought, right? At the end of the day, we need to pay for what we bought. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, and I'm not going to say that Dan and I didn't consider doing that, because we had cash assets that we were hoping to hang on to. And, we found ourselves in a position, and I've talked to you guys before about us being business owners, and we are business owners. We've been business owners for many years. But just prior to me being a business owner, I was in banking. Okay. And so I was a banker and a branch manager, and I was learning all about these banking products that I am now telling you in more depth and detail about today. And so, Dan and I considered it because we were between a rock and a hard place. Let's just put it that way. We had businesses and they were successful, but we had all these debts from all these startup businesses that we were doing, that we probably put the cart in front of the horse in a lot of ways, right? We should have probably waited for one of them to really take off before we started, others. And we didn't do that, right? But we got through that point in our lives, and we did okay. But we found ourselves, actually, we did better than okay at the end of the story. But we found ourselves in a place where we were so payment poor, so strapped with payments, these debt payments, right, that we took on to help fund these businesses, that it put us in a really rough spot. And so, I came across, after going to see a bankruptcy attorney, I came across Velocity Banking. And that is when I never looked back, because it was Velocity Banking that changed everything for Dan and I. Okay. So I want to bring that to you guys, and I know it will make a difference for you, because whether you have already filed for bankruptcy or, had filed for bankruptcy in the past or are just in a tight spot, Velocity Banking works for just about everybody, and it will eventually. So even if you did file for bankruptcy, you can still use Velocity Banking to carry forward and to move forward in your finances. So this is a couple here who I want to really dig into and show you guys that you might be in the worst position in the world, or so you think, and have things be not so bad at the end of the day. And when we take a look at your finances, or you take a look at your finances, you will find that there are options. And for these guys, there were actually a few options. So let's talk about some bad advice. And the reason this couple in particular were considering bankruptcy is because a relative of theirs, about 20 years ago or so, somewhere around there, filed for bankruptcy, walked away from everything, and came back smelling like roses. And so the advice from that family member was, you guys should drop everything, file for bankruptcy, and start again, right? Begin again. Now, that's all well and good. However, 20 years ago, it was different. Things look different. Okay. And not only that, we should pay for the things that we purchased. I don't think that we should, be irresponsible and walk away, because that is not the way to live. And that's certainly not the way that we should be showing our kids, right? So they got some bad advice from a relative that did this. And they came and they thought, okay, well, maybe we could do something similar and get rid of some of these debts that they incurred from a multitude of reasons. One, they helped some kids out that are not able to repay them at the moment. And two, they started an online business that really hasn't taken off. And so they use their credit cards to try to fund that. And so, they found themselves in their late 50s, approaching retirement. They're not there yet. They have a lot of good years left to work, right? But they're in a tight spot and too late in life for this, right? At this point in time. So let's talk a little bit about bad advice. And you guys be very careful. Be so careful with bankruptcies. They really aren't as great as everybody makes them out to be. They're a ding on your record, and ruining your credit is probably just about one of the worst things you can do. All right. So bad advice, right? Reasons you do not want to file for bankruptcy. So the attitude from a lot of people is, it's fine, it's fine, I don't need credit. And that's actually what the wife said. She's like, I don't need credit, it's fine, we can file for bankruptcy and we'll probably be okay. And so I said, yeah, but that's not necessarily the case, and let's walk through it. So we walked through it with them. So number one, it ruins your credit for 7 years, all right? That is going to be on your record for a heck of a long time. And so you're going to ruin your credit. And I know you don't think you're going to need credit right now, and you don't think you're ever going to need it down the road, but there are a million reasons why later on that you can't even foresee at this point that might come into play. So be very careful with that, okay? Two, you won't be able to get out of all of your debts. So a lot of people think that they're going to file for bankruptcy and they're going to get rid of all these debts. They're going to get out of all these debts and they're going to move on and they're going to have wipe it clean, have a fresh, clean slate. That isn't always the case. And so when you have money and and the courts take a good look at everything, if they find places where they can reallocate, okay, they're going to do that, and you're going to end up having to pay for your debts anyway. All right. They're going to either sell everything and then you're going to have to pay certain things back. It's not like you can just walk away from everything. So there's lots that goes on in the court that's going to come into play here. And a lot of them you probably don't want to visit or revisit if you're looking at this for a second time. So there are such things as like court fines, right? You've got, you won't be able to get out of all of your debts. There's certain things like court fines you won't be able to get out of. Recent income tax you won't be able to get out of. You won't be able to get out of alimony, nor will you be able to get out of child support. And any debt that's incurred from any kind of illegal act, such as embezzlement or larceny, something like that. Hopefully that's not the case with a lot of you, but I just want to put that out there. Now, student loans are another thing that people think that they can walk away from, and that is iffy. So student loans, you may not be able to enter into a bankruptcy, or you may, depending on how the court looks at it and looks at, whether these student loans are causing you such hardship that you'll never be able to get out of it. So that one's a little sketchy. I know, in watching Dave Ramsey over the years, I know Dave always says you can't get out of student loans, but I've read that that's not necessarily the truth, okay, or true. So this is something that Dave Ramsey and I for sure agree on, is that bankruptcy isn't necessarily the answer here, and probably isn't. Divorce, bankruptcy, two things I think, man, unless there's something really crazy going on, let's not do it, okay? Because there's a whole other, there always is a light at the end of the tunnel, right? There's always a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, so to speak, all right? So 3 here, the court takes all of your assets and then decides what you can get back, okay? So, that's what Dan and I were thinking. We're like, okay, well, we'll be able to keep our house. We'll be able, maybe we'll sell off some of these business assets that we have, but then we'll be able to move on and kind of, clean things up a bit. And then we should be okay because we have these other assets here that we could use. Well, that probably wasn't going to happen the way we wanted it to. And actually, I know it wasn't. And so you have to be really careful, because the things you think you're going to be able to hang on to, you may not be able to. And so that's why you really, really, really want to take a hard look at things before you file for bankruptcy. And I'm going to tell you, try not to, okay? So 4, this is not an easy step to building wealth, okay? So again, Dan and I thought, okay, well, we'll hang on to some of the cash that we have, and then it'll continue to build, and we'll be able to invest more, and we'll be able to do things with these cash assets. Not the case, okay? That's not going to happen, because no matter how hard you think you're going to hide your assets, and believe me, there are people out there that think they can, they're going to find them. And so it's not going to work out for you. So let's look at other options. And I have one for you. It's amazing. It's called Pay Down Debt Solutions, and it's called Velocity Banking. So let's look into that, right? Okay. So here are some things that bad credit can affect. So let's talk about tanking your credit and why you don't want to do that, okay? So number one, loan applications. For any loan app, and you know how I feel about loans, we'll say loans and lines, okay? So for any kind of loan or line application, it can affect your application for sure, okay? So for sure that can happen. Two, credit card applications. If you think you're going to get some credit cards down the road and you filed for bankruptcy, you're going to be in a world of hurt because you're going to have a really rough time with that. Again, 7 years, that's on your record, all right? So then we go into mortgage applications, okay? So if you want to buy a house and let's say you want to get a mortgage, well, you're going to have a problem with the bankruptcy on your record. You're probably not going to be able to do that either, all right? So that's going to be a problem. What if you want to rent something? What if you want to go on vacation and you want to do it like a vacation rental, something like that? That's going to be a problem because that's on your record too, all right? So rentals are a problem. And then job applications. So let's say you go ahead, you file for bankruptcy, and you think, okay, no worries, I don't need this. I have a job, I have everything I need. I don't need credit. Remember, I don't need any more credit. I'm good. What happens if you lose your job? What happens? What happens if you lose your job? What happens if the company you work for goes under, or the small business owner you work for closes up shop, and then the person that takes over is terrible, and so you want to get out of it? Well, now you got a problem, because sometimes, quite often, you'll have these applications out there and these employers that are going to check your finances, especially your credit history, especially in banking, right? So I would have never been able to get my job as a banker or as a branch manager if I had a bankruptcy on my record. I wouldn't be able to. Now, granted, we had looked at doing a bankruptcy after that fact, right? It kind of in between some things. But had I had that, I'd have been in trouble and I would have never had that job in the first place, okay? Insurance applications, that'll be a problem for insurance applications. Vehicle rentals, again, if you want to lease a car, that's going to be a problem, all right? You want to rent a car because your vehicle is in the shop, right? And you're like, okay, well, I don't need credit because I already have a car. It's a pretty new car. No worries. Car goes in the shop. You don't have access to it for a few weeks. You want to rent a car? Now you can't, right? So that's a problem. Credit cards with benefits. So if you want a credit card and you want to get a credit card that's going to pay you back, a lot of those rewards cards you're not going to be able to get because you're not going to be able to get cards with benefits when you have, tanked credit or ruined credit or bad credit, right? Lower interest rates. So if you have good credit, the reward for good credit is lower interest rates, 100%. And so if you have credit that isn't great or a little bit sketchy, you're going to be paying higher interest rates. And we all know we want to get out of those interest payments and that interest that we have accrued through payments. And the lower the interest is, obviously, the less we're going to pay back. All right. So then better loan terms, right? So better loan repayment terms. So if you have good credit, you're going to have better loan repayment terms than you are if you have bad credit. And then cell phones. So cell phones may ask you, to prepay if you have bad credit. You won't be able to, have just a regular cell phone bill. You'll have to prepay. So that's another thing to consider. And then utilities. You may not get certain utilities if you don't have good credit. So there's a whole list, right? A laundry list of reasons why you want to maintain or keep your credit. So I implore you guys, don't file for bankruptcy. Don't go into these loan repayment plans. There is a solution, and the solution is velocity banking, okay? So let's kind of talk about this customer, or not customer, this student scenario that we have, these people that we met. And let's talk about what happened to them. I told you that, they had some kids that they helped and the kids aren't able to repay them right now, okay? And then they tried an online business, and that online business kept costing them money and kept costing them more money. And as they're trying to make it work, they're incurring more and more debt. So then they find themselves in a world of hurt, okay? And so here they are, like I said, they're getting into that, final stages of their employer or employment history, and they want to start looking at retirement. And that's actually why they started this online business, because they thought, okay, well, we're going to retire in a few years. And then if we have this online business that we can do from home, that will be great. So their intentions were great, right? And that is awesome. And I hope that you guys do try other things and do try to work for yourself. But you have to do it, and you have to do it within reason. You have to be smart about it, and you have to take a good look. If things aren't working, then you have to pull back, right? And so now they've pulled back, but they've pulled back kind of late in the game. But we're going to help them out, and we're going to solve it for them, okay? So we are going to use credit to pay for credit, right? To help us get out of our credit situation, our bad credit situation. So we're going to use that. So in this student scenario, right, they were going to file for bankruptcy, again, based on advice that they got from a family member, all right? But they came to our doorstep and they said, okay, help us through this. Help us navigate through this. They know that we've said before, not to file for bankruptcy, but they didn't see a way out, okay? And so we looked at things and we found some pretty incredible things about, their situation in general. So let's take a look at this. So we've got an income here of $5,000, all right? And we have total expenses of $50.90, so $5,090. So what happens? What's the problem here? You guys can all see it. It's blaring in red, right? They are negative. They are negative by $90 and they have debt, okay? So their cash flow here, they're upside down, all right? They have a mortgage payment for $1,390. They have had this mortgage for 22 years. They have not refinanced it in 22 years, which I find absolutely amazing. And I'm so glad that they didn't do that. That was very smart on their part. Now, this mortgage is at a 6.25, I believe it is. I don't think I wrote it up there. Sorry, guys. I think it's at a 6.25 though. Yeah, I think it is. All right, so that mortgage is sitting at a 6.25. They did not refinance and they've had it for 22 years, okay? So we'll kind of set that off to the side. Now, when we take a look at all of the things that they have going on, all right, the first thing we did was we did talk to them on their sheet, their organized sheet. Remember, organize, identify, and implement. On their organized sheet, they had down there that they have a 401k, okay? And while they didn't really want to take any loans from it, totally fine with that, no worries. What I did notice is they had contributions, all right? And their contributions were high. So the first thing we did is we backed off of their contributions, both of them. And guess what we did? Just from that one simple movement, we then changed their income from $5,000 to $5,763. Now, this doesn't have to be permanent. This can be temporary, right? This can be a temporary fix for a little while. And so what that did was that then turned their negative to a positive, because now we have $673 in cash flow that we can now work with to help get them out, to help dig them out of this potential bankruptcy situation, right? All right, so move number one, loved it. They were thrilled, they were on board, they couldn't believe it. They didn't even think about it, right? So again, we offer you guys choices, but you make those changes, right? So they did that first off, okay? So now we do have some cash flow to work with, but let's look at what they've got going on. Now they have a loan out here for $33,167. It is at $843 a month. That would be a lot, right? And it's at a 7.3%, 7.325 as a matter of fact. And the payback on that would be, at the end of the term, is $5,483. Now, this loan was part of what they did to help their kids out. Okay, so that was part of it. The car loan that they have is for $16,816 is the remaining balance. And I forgot my comma. Sorry, guys, forgot that. And then we've got $329 is the monthly payment. And so we've got a 6% interest rate, all right? If we let this term out, it's 6 years. Sorry, this one was 4 years above. It is for 6 years, and the repayment interest would be $2,719. Then they have a Chase card, all right? These are the cards now that they started charging up to try to fund this business, all right? So they have a Chase card at $11,511. The monthly payment on that is $316. And so it is at a 21% interest rate. And if they let that term out at the 21% interest rate at this payment, it's going to take them 5 years and cost them $3,500, okay, in payback interest. Then they have a Discover card for $8,260. So for $8,260, the payment on that is for $248. And then the interest that they're being charged is a whopper. It's 24%, okay? So their payback amount is $4,810 by the time they're done with this. They have a Capital One. Now, this is the mini one out of all of their cards, and it's at $3,682. The payment on that is $101. It is at a 21%, and the payback, this is a really funny number, the payback on that after 5 years is $2,222, okay? So if we add up these debts, sorry, not including the mortgage, it adds up to $18,734 in interest that they're going to owe by the time that these terms are done, all right? So right now, their total debt, excluding that mortgage, is $73,436. So somehow we have to come up with a way to help them get out of the debts that they're in. And now we flipped their negative to a positive. What is the best we can do for them? All right, so we took a hard look at all of this. Now, I told you before that they did not refinance their house, and they've had this same payment for now 22 years, okay? So they have 8 years left on their mortgage. So their appraised value is at $242. So $242,000 is the appraised value. That's at an 80% loan to value, okay? So we're thinking home equity line of credit at this point, okay? So home equity line of credit, 80% loan to value means that they would get 100, that their 80% loan to value is 193,600, all right? So they were able to secure a home equity line of credit, and they did it for $180,000, okay? That is at a 10.75% interest rate. So we have a couple things we could do. And again, choices and changes. We give you guys choices. It's up to you to make the changes. And now we are on step 2 of our 3-step system, our 3-step strategy. We organized, right? We did the organization on that. We are going to now identify what we're going to use. Well, we already know because we're using a home equity line of credit to help us out with some of this. Now, I want to pause here and mention to you guys, you can do a lot of this with credit cards. You don't have to get a home equity line of credit to do the pay down strategy. There is a max card strategy that is phenomenal that'll help you get there if your credit is dinged and you can't get any kind of line of credit. Your line of credit that you can currently use can be that credit card, and we can help you figure out and navigate through that. So the beauty of the pay down system is that we're taking different cards and lines and we're using them together, okay, to create a plan. So we're identifying our plan at this point, and it will be to use a home equity. But we have a couple different options on how we can execute that, all right? So if we take a look at this, now, if they were to then, let's say, the first thing we looked at was taking this and incorporating all of our debt, including our mortgage, because the mortgage balance was, I think, $93,000. Yeah, mortgage balance is $93,120. Okay, so $93,000. If we take that and we add to it all of these debts, right, the $73,436, we would then come up with $166,556. All right. So that's what we would do if we did this strategy. We're going to combine the two debts and we're going to see what will happen. So if we add our high balance, right, and our low balance, we're going to get our interest rate. So what happens is, remember, we paycheck park. We're going to take our paycheck, and in this case, because we're using that home equity line of credit, we don't have to hold back any non-chargeables because everything can be run through that checking account. Because it will draft then from that home equity line of credit hooked up for overdraft protection. So your checking account sits there. Your direct deposit comes into the checking account for $57.63. That $57.63, then a payment gets made to the home equity line of credit right here. That's what this is. So that payment gets made, drops our balance immediately, all right, to $160,793. Now, it does that because it's simple interest and it's on an average daily balance. The average daily balance is then what we're going to figure our interest on. So we take our high balance, we take our low balance, we add them together, and we're going to divide them by 2. That will give us our average, and then we're going to multiply by 0.1075, okay? And that is just our home equity line of credit interest rate, and we moved it into a decimal, okay, so that we can work with it. That will give us a year's worth of interest. We don't want a year, we want 1 month because it's going to continuously drop. So we take that number, divide it by 12 then, okay? And that's going to give me $1,466. But remember, we don't have this mortgage payment anymore, right? Because all of these debts are gone, plus this mortgage, because that comes back to us as cash flow. And that is the secret to velocity banking. When you run your finances this way, those debts that you had that you enveloped by this home equity line of credit are gone. You don't owe them anymore because they're inside that line, all right? And this mortgage, again, same thing. You don't owe it. It's inside this line. So what you owe is that home equity line of credit payment, which is really going to be interest only, because at this point, if it was 1% times the interest rate, or 1% plus the interest, it's going to be less than this direct deposit for sure, okay? So really the only thing that we're paying for is the interest rate. All the rest of that money comes back to us as cash flow. So that's what I'm showing here. So our living expenses, and their living expenses were low, so they don't have a spend problem. They actually have a debt problem, right? So this is their living expenses. So the living expenses are $1,863 when you take all this debt and you get rid of it. Okay, so that's what the living expenses are. And I just showed you what the interest expense is. So now we have our low balance here, right? We add back in our expenses because we have to pay for our stuff, right, throughout the month. And then we pay for our interest through, well, one time, but that has to come back in to our line of credit. So then we went from $167.93 to the end of the month to $164.122, but we've dropped it by $2,000 plus, okay? So we've dropped it, and now we continue on, okay? So we continue on with this strategy, and we're going to run it down to completion, okay? So what does completion look like? Let's look at that. So if I take away my piece of paper to my revealing piece of paper, so what we would have is 53 months to pay off the mortgage and all of our debts. Okay, it would take 53 months for them to pay it off this way. So that's 4.4 years, and they would pay a total of $42,498 total, okay, for all of it, which means they saved over letting this play out $5,848. Okay, so that's what they saved. So when you take the 18, right, you take that and you add it into the interest that they spent on just this, it comes to the $42,498. All right, so we saved then the $58.48. Now, what is the next option that we have? Well, the next option is leave that mortgage alone, let that mortgage play out 8 more years. So maybe we do that. Maybe that's the next thing we do. And if we do that, it's going to look something like this. We're going to take the $73,436. We're going to put that into our line of credit, and we are going to run our expenses and everything through that, but our mortgage. Okay, so the mortgage then, oh no, I'm sorry. We're running everything through it. The only thing we're not putting in there is our living expenses, are right. So the living expenses are subtracted from our income. So it's our income minus the living expenses is what we would have. Okay. Now, so that comes to the, I'm sorry, not the income. It's our total expenses minus our living expenses, which is the $32.53. I don't know where my brain is today. Apparently not here. Sorry. Okay. So anyway, so our new expenses are $3,253. Then we have to add back in our interest. And remember how we figured that again. High balance, low balance, added together, divide by 2, multiply by the 0.1075, multiply by that. And then we get the year's worth, and then we have to divide that by then 12 to get our interest, which is $632, all right? So if we continue on and run our strategy this way, so we've left that mortgage alone, we have then we've just taken care of our debt, our debts here, right? Our loan debts. We've taken care of our loan debts. So what does that then look like? So let's look at the next scenario. All right. So again, we left that mortgage alone. We're not going to touch it. We're going to let it play out for 8 years. All right. So here's what that looks like. So that takes 32 months. It takes 2.6 years. And our interest that we would incur from doing this is $11,065. Okay, so $11,065, which means they then spent a total of $40,677 to pay for all of these debts versus, right, the total that it would be, because remember, we had all of the home equity interest is in here, okay? So the $40,677, all right, so that means they saved then they saved $7,669, okay, total interest. All right, so that's not a bad option either, is it? So that is something that we could have considered too. Now, let's look at our last scenario. So it doesn't always mean that it's the cheapest, most inexpensive thing to do to put everything all together, right? It really just depends. So the last situation or scenario that we came up with is taking our mortgage, okay? And once we get to this point, all right, so what we're going to do in this scenario is we are going to just take these debts. We're going to then work those debts down for 2.6 years, all right? At that point, now we work the debts down here and then we left the mortgage, right? So all that mortgage interest plus that all added together got us to $46.77. Now, if we then decide that we are going to do this scenario and we're going to pay all these through the home equity line, so we've then paid $11,065. But let's say at that 2.6 years, we then take our mortgage at that point in time and put it into now our home equity. So we pay it off with our home equity, get rid of the mortgage, and now the mortgage is inside that home equity. Now let's look at how things turn out, okay? So that means that in 2.6 years, our mortgage balance is going to be about $65,069, right? Because at that point, everything is dropping, everything's lowering. And so right about that point in time, it's going to be $65,069, okay? So what happens is we then have our $11,065 plus the $18,252. Now, how did I get that? So what I did is I added the interest that we paid in the 2 years that we ran this down. Okay, so the interest in the mortgage, the mortgage was $13,051, and then I had to add to it, all right, the $5,201 from the payoff, right? So the payoff amount, the home equity amount that we've used to pay off the mortgage, okay, the rest of that mortgage. So that was $5,201, all right? So when you add those together, that equals $18,252. But we still have to add it to the interest from paying off of our loan debts, right? So that total amount then comes to $29,317 in interest. Now that is the choice, right? That's the one we want to do. So when you look at your finances and when you run Velocity Banking, you have options, plenty of them. If they didn't want to do anything with their house and leave their house alone, they could. They could absolutely just let it play out. They're still going to save money at the end of the day, all right? And they don't have to look at bankruptcy. They don't even have to blink at it, right? So their situation was helped considerably, number one, just by backing off their 401 contributions, right? So they left the employer match, but they backed it down, freeing up between the two of them, their two jobs, $673. So that alone, that move alone, saved them a ton of money. And then if they ran their Velocity Banking, they'd still come out in the end, right? But doing it, taking a good look at your whole picture and piecing and parting it together, right? Using Velocity Banking can save you a heck of a lot of money, you guys. And this couple was thrilled when they left. Their plan, their strategy is most likely going to be this at the end of the day. They didn't know what they didn't know, and you don't know what you don't know. Just think about it. They're using debt tools to pay for debt, right? They're using their debt and paying off their debt at the same time. How incredible is that? Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you. I appreciate every last one of you, and I hope you find that bankruptcy is not the answer. If you like what you see and you want more of it, and I want to get the word out to everyone, right? Please like and subscribe. That will help us. That will help get the word out. Have an awesome day, and I will see you next time.